Hi guys, story recaps here. Today, I am going to explain a 2016 American science fiction romance film called Passengers. Spoilers ahead. Enjoy and take care. The interstellar spaceship Avalon is shown cruising through space on its way to Homestead 2, a colonized world. The ship is on autopilot and all of its quarters are empty. The 258 staff members and 5,000 passengers have gone into hibernation. The ship unexpectedly crosses into an asteroid belt, weakening its shielding. The ship's power is diverted to the main shield, but it's on the verge of colliding with a massive asteroid. The asteroid collides with the ship unexpectedly, creating several faults. However, one of the hibernation pods activates, and the ship begins self-repairs. Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer, was the passenger who awoke. When his pod opens, an automatic device assists him in waking up, informing him that he has been in suspended animation for 120 years, and that the ship is only 4 months away from Homestead 2. He's been informed that he'll be able to spend that time relaxing and enjoying the ship's luxuries. Prior to his arrival on the planet, Jim receives instructions about his ID band, his cabin, and the principal activities he will participate in. Excited and nervous to meet the people on the ship, he gets ready, leaves his cabin, and enters an automated class intended for a large group of students. As the hologram discusses the situation on Earth, Jim becomes concerned, calling it overcrowded, costly, and overdone. It advises him to save his questions until the end of the lesson, but Jim can't stop himself from questioning why he's the only one there. He understands that the hologram is unable to respond to him, and sets out to find other individuals. He makes his way to the ship's main concourse. There is no one else there, but an automated information desk offers assistance. When Jim requests to speak with a real person, he is sent to speak with a steward, but when he discovers that no one is available, he requests to speak with the captain. Even though he doesn't have permission to enter the bridge, he notices that none of the main crew members are awake. When Jim finally makes it to the observatory, he discovers that the spacecraft is 90 years distant from Homestead 2. He realizes he awoke too soon and goes back to the concourse, where he sends a message to Earth, wondering what he should do because he has no idea how to return to sleep. That making an overpriced call to Earth will take 55 years to receive a response. Jim is heartbroken. He wanders around till he comes across the ship's bar, where he notices another individual. Something odd about him appears as he's conversing with the bartender. Jim realizes he's an android as he tries to bring him a drink. It's called Arthur. Jim wants to get more information from him, but he has no idea how he was able to arrive ahead of schedule. The next day, Jim wakes up in his cabin and walks to the cantina, where he quickly discovers that most of the items on the menu are only available to gold-class travelers. He gets a cup of ordinary coffee and thinks how to repair his hibernating chamber. He manages to get it working after obtaining all of the necessary tools and rests down inside the pod. However, nothing happens. He then decides to enter the crew's hibernation chambers using the tools he discovered. That isn't going to work either. Small malfunctions happen around the ship. Jim keeps returning to the bar to drink, but mostly to talk to Arthur. The android gives him some advice, and he decides to break into one of the ship's gold-class chambers and attempt to have some fun. Jim tries every restaurant, game, and entertainment system available, but as time passes, he becomes ever more frustrated of being alone. One day, he gets drunk and wanders around the hibernation pods, when he stumbles into an airlock with spacesuits designed for spacewalks. Jim gets into a suit and goes to the airlock, pushes a lever, and then the button to release the airlock door. He's fascinated by the view once he's stepped off the ship. He is the only conscious human being present at that precise moment. Jim lets go of the magnets on his boots and floats in space. Heartbroken, he returns inside, removes the suit, and returns to the airlock without it. He pulls the lever, ready to end it all, but changes his mind in the last moment, runs back inside and slips on a bottle. Jim stands up and is instantly drawn to a woman in one of the pods, named Aurora. He searches for her files in the directory and listens to her passenger interview. Becoming enamored with her, he was later seen sitting next to her pod, listening to her interviews. He's reading some of her work in the bar and talking to Arthur about her writing. He becomes obsessed with the absurdity of his situation. He's traveling to another planet for a better life. He's waking up early and not making it, and finding his perfect woman, only for her to be out of reach. Jim keeps thinking about her and starts getting the idea to wake her up too. He talks it over with the android, but he doesn't understand the conundrum. If he wakes her up for his own benefit, he'd be stranding her there with him, to die on the ship. Jim decides against it first, but as time goes by he can't let it go, until one day, he changes his mind. He goes to her pod and manages to activate it. As she's waking up and going through the same process as he did, he hides and goes back to his room, a little bit. Later he goes to the main concourse, hoping to find her, and there she is. Just as confused as he was a year ago, Jim tells her they're the only ones awake and takes her to the observatory. He then informs her that he is unable to contact the crew or the ship's primary control. Aurora is terrified and longs to return to her pod. When they arrive, Jim informs her that there is no specific technology on board that can assist them in returning to hibernation, thus stating that they are stranded. They return to the concourse, and he advises her to relax because she has just come from hibernation. She feels bad for him because he's been alone aboard the ship for more than a year. Jim returns to the bar, regretful of what he has done. He requests that Arthur not inform Aurora that he was the one who awoke her the next day. Aurora wakes up, she goes back to the concourse and asks the automated info desk about the hibernation pods. Jim joins her there, and they go to get breakfast. As they leave, the info desk has some sort of malfunction. Aurora notices that Jim has been eating the same breakfast for over a year and orders him one of the gold-class menus at the cantina. They discuss the possibility of repairing the pods, but Aurora, unlike Jim, isn't ready to give up. She begins her search in the infirmary, then moves on to research records before arriving at the crew's hibernation rooms and attempting to burst the doors open. More malfunctions are found by Jim around the ship. Aurora regrets her existence on the Avalon sometime later. She writes, jogs around the ship and swims in the pool, becoming more and more aware of her situation. She goes to the cantina to interview Jim, thinking that his story might be interesting. She asks why he immigrated to the colony. Jim answers with slogans from the company first, but then further explains that he hopes that on the new world he could be somebody, he could build a life. Later, they arrive at the observatory, where Aurora finally explains why she is there. She has a round-trip ticket. Unlike the other passengers aboard the ship, her plan was to travel to Homestead 2, live there for a year, and then return to Earth as the first journalist to do so. Writing the greatest tale ever told, Aurora gradually loses hope in finding a solution to their current position, and Jim devises a plan to cheer her up. He takes her to the dance studio, the movies, and the basketball court. Finally, he takes her to Arthur's pub to meet him. She unwinds for a moment before recalling their circumstances. Jim is left alone with the android, feeling awful about what he's done to her. The next moment he's seen tinkering with something, and in the other Aurora walks into the observatory to find a miniature of the Chrysler building he made for her. Sometime later, they go on a date at the bar. They have dinner and share stories about their lives. She tells him that her father died when she was a teenager. Following dinner, Jim takes Aurora to the airlock, where they don their spacesuits. They take a joint spacewalk. Jim finally has someone to share that magnificent experience with. Jim switches off the magnets on their boots and they float together in space. They come back inside and immediately kiss, retreat to his cabin and sleep together. Soon after, they start living like a couple. Aurora finds a home in his stateroom and begins writing about her experiences aboard ship. They jog, dine, and sleep in the same room. Jim continues his search for the hydroponics bay on board the spacecraft. He brings Aurora flowers. They go to the observatory one day when the ship passes by a red giant. It's Aurora's birthday, so they have a party in one of the ship's various restaurants and then in the bar later that night. While Jim prepares the ring he made for Aurora in the washroom, Aurora continues to converse with Arthur in the bar. The android tells Aurora that Jim woke her up intentionally, unaware that he was still to keep it a secret. Jim comes from nowhere, and she confronts him. Stunned, she runs, enraged and terrified. When Jim returns to his cabin, he discovers that all of her things have gone. The next day, he runs into her in the cantina, but she leaves as soon as he speaks. Aurora is in a tough spot. She goes over to Jim's cabin one night, hitting and kicking him and threatening to murder him. Jim tries to apologize and explain his behavior to her over the comm because she keeps avoiding him. He tells her he fell in love with her, but Aurora doesn't care. She can't forgive him for taking her life. Another failure occurs one night while Jim is in his cabin. The main command of the spacecraft is shut down due to a major fault. Later, he walks into the elevator and it malfunctions. Aurora walks into the main concourse and sees that Jim has planted a tree there. Then, she goes to the cantina where the food dispensary is also malfunctioning. Suddenly, both of them hear the voice of the deck chief over the comms, asking who planted the tree. They both dash onto the concourse, where they come face to face with Gus Mancuso, who is standing in front of Jim's tree. They introduce themselves and explain the issue to the chief. He just doesn't get that 3 pods might fail. Mancuso brings them to the bridge, where he determines that the spacecraft is malfunctioning, but the information on the Systems must be manually examined. When they depart the bridge, a robot nearly falls on them, and the two of them inform Mancuso that breakdowns had been occurring more regularly throughout the ship. He assures them that this will not occur as he demonstrates how to acquire the data. Mancuso checks on the pods. When Jim joins him there, he's figured out what happened with Aurora's pod. The deck chief finds what Jim did to be terrible. Later, he's at the bridge checking the collected data. When Aurora joins him, they talk about what happened with her pod, but he tells her that he can't do anything about it. Jim enters, carrying the 16th broken robot. Mancuso is suffering from hibernation sickness and goes to sleep, but as he leaves, he coughs up blood. Aurora can't sleep that night, so she goes for a swim. Suddenly, there is a loss of gravity throughout the ship, and she begins to die as the water from the pool follows her. She barely makes it out alive once the gravity drive resets. They interact on their way to find Mancuso. They've returned to the bridge and are slowly figuring out what's going on with the ship. Mancuso figures out that something happened 2 years ago. Taking out a major system, they need to find and fix what has caused the failure because the entire ship is trying to pick up the slack. If they don't fix it, the entire vessel will be stranded. They go to find the problem, but Mancuso faints, so Jim and Aurora take him to the infirmary. He's dying, and there's nothing that can be done to stop it or extend the time he has left. Later, the three of them meet in the observatory, where Mancuso hands Jim his ID bracelet, orders them to repair the ship, and then dies. The lights suddenly turn an alarming red, and the ship begins to shake. Jim tells Aurora that he requires her help, and the two rush to engineering, but the gravity drive fails again. And then there's another one, this time afflicting Arthur as well. Jim turns him off. They finally make it to engineering and begin investigating for the source of the problem. They find it in the power plant, and Aurora is sucked in as they open the hatch. The asteroid has caused a breach in the hull in that area. Jim gets sucked in too, but he holds on to the hatch as it keeps closing on him. Eventually, he gets sucked in too, but they quickly manage to seal the breach. Instantly after fixing that problem, Jim realizes that there is more than one breach in the hull. They track the meteor's path and discover that it has collided with the reactor control computer. Jim believes he will be able to find replacement parts for it. They locate the part and replace it. But the reactor's venting procedure continues to fail. They attempt it manually, but it fails once again. Jim realizes that they need to cool the reactor by opening the vent door from the outside of the ship. Both of them go to the airlock, and as he's getting ready to go out, he gives Aurora Mancuso's bracelet because he might not come back. She helps him with the suit, and as he walks into the airlock, she tells him to come back because she can't live on the ship without him. Aurora goes back to the reactor, where the temperature has hit critical heights. The temperature in the reactor room rises as he tries to open the vent door by bypassing it. He quickly recognizes that he'll have to hold the door open manually to allow the reactor to vent, and he informs Aurora. Although she opposes the proposal, he goes ahead with it and instructs her to vent the reactor. They quarrel because she doesn't want him to die, but he reminds her that they have to save the others. So she vents the reactor. The process is successful, but the fumes from the reactor push Jim away and break his tether. The pressure in his suit is dropping too. He tells Aurora what happened, and she moves as fast as she can to get to another suit and bring him in. He apologizes to her again. She puts on a suit and flies out to get him, but her tether is too short. She's being pushed back, but she manages to grab his leash and pull him in. Aurora drags Jim inside the hospital, only to discover that he has already died. She resuscitates Jim by using Mancuso's bracelet to bypass medical standards. Jim is revived by the medical pod, which performs the task automatically. Aurora accepts his apology. Later, Aurora repairs Arthur, and Mancuso is given a suitable space burial. Jim brings her to the infirmary and informs her that he's figured out how to turn the medical pod into a hibernation pod. He tells her to get inside the pod and ride out the rest of the journey in there, but as it turns out, she declines and opts to stay on the ship with him. Awake, Jim eventually proposes to her, and the two spend the rest of their lives together on the ship. The Avalon arrives on Homestead 2. 88 years later, when the crew awakens, they discover the ship in an unusual state. Aurora sends them a message, telling them about her and Jim's time aboard the ship while the rest of the crew slept.
Subscribe and turn on the notifications. We daily upload videos like this.